Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning or good evening, depending on where in the world you are. Welcome to our third Infrastructure Evolution Forum entitled Delivering Infrastructure in the New World Order. I'm Tim McManus, a member of the Board of Directors for Turner & Townsend and the Industry Director for Columbia University's Global Leaders in Construction Management program that was founded by my good friend and colleague, Professor Ibrahim O'Day, 12 years ago. Infrastructure Evolution is a forum dedicated to sharing new perspectives on creating and improving the built environments that shape where we live and work. This platform is a partnership between Turner & Townsend, a global professional services firm and industry thought leader, and Columbia University's Global Leaders in Construction Management, a strategic construction management research initiative. Over the last 10 or so years, successful delivery of infrastructure assets has taken on several new dimensions and expanded the scope of what can be achieved through investment. In short, it could be said that it's no longer enough to just build a high quality asset on time and on budget that provides a great customer experience. Now we're more likely to define a successful project as one that is still high quality and provides a best-in-class customer experience, but also provides economic opportunity and social mobility to the surrounding communities and disadvantaged businesses involved. It also employs techniques and practices that reduce waste, limit carbon emissions, and leverages cutting-edge innovations and technologies that increase productivity, stakeholder consensus, and automation. In addition, coming out of the global pandemic, all 5 generations of the professionals in our industry now expect to work and collaborate in non-traditional manners, thereby changing the look of our offices, our job sites, and our homes, and how we interact and how we communicate and manage our projects. The US infrastructure is now getting ready for the infusion of capital from the $1.5 trillion Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that was signed into law 186 days ago today by President Biden. Of that $1.5 trillion, $550 billion is new funding. It's estimated by McKinsey that this new funding for the IIJA could create over 3 million new jobs for our industry over the next 10 years. However, current estimates by the Associated Builders and Contractors shows that the construction industry needs more than 500,000 workers in 2022 to meet the current demand, even before the IIJA kicks in. We're all interested to see how these changes are causing our respective companies and organizations to evolve and reconfigure what once were assumed methods of working, and how the vision of the future has changed for all of us. I'm joined today by 4 leaders of our industry to talk about this new world order, who've been very active in helping to shape the future of America's infrastructure industry in different ways. I'm joined by Dwayne Gilmore, a real estate and infrastructure executive for Google, Jennifer Almont, AECOM's chief executive for global transportation, Greg Sauter, the president of WGI Engineering, and also a former adjunct faculty at Columbia University, and Mark Blumkin, the executive vice president and director of US infrastructure for Turner & Townsend. Let me start with you, Dwayne. Question, Dwayne, you've been involved with some of the industry's most fascinating projects around the world through your roles at Arup, Disney, and now at Google. Over the last 5 to 7 years, we've seen a significant advancement and investment in digital and technology solutions to improve how we design, construct, and manage infrastructure assets and projects in various ways. How has Google leveraged these types of solutions and innovations to change how work and projects get delivered these days?
Well, firstly, thanks for having me, Tim, and thanks everyone for sharing a part of Infrastructure Week with me. You know, Tim, I think I guess there's really 2 parts to your question, like how is Google dealing with things today and how are we looking forward? But I think it's always healthy to look backwards before you start looking forwards to get a sense of who we are as an industry and how we got here, firstly. And I'm talking infrastructure and industry, not tech, just to be clear. And if we reach way back into history, I think it's fun to contemplate sort of a Renaissance period where engineers were architects and architects were artists and artists were philosophers. And there wasn't any distinction between people who delivered infrastructure itself. So as time moved along, we started creating divisions of labor, and engineers became engineers, and then engineers became civil engineers and mechanical engineers. And one thing to kind of contemplate there is, do engineers become tech people, and do you sort of start getting a breaking down from this point forward? I mean, we've seen it with even, typing into LinkedIn, if you've ever looked for a job, the word infrastructure, most of the jobs are in IT, right? So I think with the infrastructure bill being passed, we've kind of taken back that word infrastructure to put it in the context of the built environment. But another point to make is, like, what has made the biggest impact on our industry in the last, say, 10 years? And I think some of the automatic reactions people have is, some of the Autodesk products or BIM. I don't think that's the case at all. I think the two things that have made the biggest impact on our industry are LinkedIn and Google Maps. And I wish that Google Maps came out of our industry and not out of the tech industry. But it's kind of interesting to reflect on Google Maps for a minute. I mean, why would Google provide that service? I mean, why are they interested in taking pictures of every perspective in the world? And why didn't we come up with it as an industry? Because, and I guess my thoughts on that is that we might be a little bit too literal about how we go about our work. And what I mean by that is the tech industry tends to kind of embody this philosophy of fail frequently, fail quickly, but fail forward. Whereas our industry doesn't seem to move at that same velocity. So another thing to point out too is, for all of the leaders in the sort of infrastructure world, what compels someone to not take a tech job and come and work for you in the infrastructure space? Not much, if you ask me. So I think that there's an element of creating a little bit more swag and a little bit more bling bling in our industry to encourage people to take on these types of jobs. There's a lot of meaningful work to be done in our industry, but how do we kind of create a more compelling story or a more compelling pool for that talent pool to actually kind of converge on what we're doing here? So I guess, reflecting on the question a little bit too, Tim, is that I kind of enjoy looking at different types of biases. And if those of you out there have looked into them, there's kind of the confirmation bias and the optimism bias and that kind of thing. And if you Google it, google.com, just a bit of publicity there. If you Google it, you'll see a list of different biases. But one of the most interesting ones is the IKEA bias, which the description of that is you tend to put more value into something that you've built yourself. And how that relates to tech in our industry, just based on my observations, is we, as the sort of infrastructure industry at large, tend to build things. Here's an iPad that you can go out to the construction site and it's never been done before. Yeah, cool, but not that useful. Here's some AI VR visualization software. Okay, we used it once, it's not that useful. However, we can't seem to get unstuck from that and say, we did it, great, what's the next thing? How can we automate traffic lights? How can we make our transportation system smarter? Who's talking to Elon Musk about how we get some of those ideas and integrate it into what we're doing? So to answer your question, Tim, honestly, I don't see a lot happening in the next 3 to 5 years, but I'm saying that to be provocative, obviously, and I'm saying that as a call to action. Like, we need to move fast. It's very rare that we have an opportunity to get to be on at center stage. Funding's not an excuse anymore. This is an ecosystem we're talking about. We're talking about people. We're talking about projects. We're talking about sustainability. How do we kind of muster up a little bit of better image around what we do? And then the solutions will start coming. One last point. People often talk about kids looking at phones, right? This is not a technology discussion. Kids looking at phones, they're just looking at other people, right? The people who are looking at LinkedIn right now while they should be listening, they're just looking at people. There's still a desire to connect people together. So if we think about tech in terms of our time and our connection to each other and how the best ideas exist between two brains, not just in one, there's an element of networking there that we have to really appreciate. Put the right people in the room, connect the right people, create a network around things. We can go a lot further if we're going together than if we go alone in all of this. So I think that there's some opportunities around looking after each other more than inventing the next technological advancement. That'll come with a better sense of community.
Those are great insights, Wayne. We're kind of hoping that you were going to give us Google's look for the next 3 to 5 years and give us all that inside baseball talk.
I'm not going to tell people our secrets, Tim, that's for sure.
I like your IKEA bias. I used Professor Flyberg's 10 biases in project management in one of my classes this year, and he talked about that exact same things. But the IKEA bias I had not heard before. I like that.
Yeah. Tim, I'm going to use that as well. And the first thing I thought of when you said you have that pride in what you built yourself, I was last week at 160 feet underneath Park Avenue, and touring our East Side Access project, which is going to take the Long Island Railroad and bring it into Grand Central. Fabulous project, and was meeting with my colleague Peter, and he actually has spent his time since 2007 building the new Grand Central terminal, 160 feet under the ground, and his grandfather was a foreman on the Long Island Railroad before him. And literally now he's building the future of the railroad, right? And to spend, if you have any doubt, you ask your question, how do we get people to come into this industry and see how glamorous it is? Come and stand by Peter, 160 feet under Park Avenue. And then that's the answer to your question, right? But that pride, and that's why people, that's the power that we have in our industry to attract people, is when you say, hey, come make the world a better place, come get your hands dirty building something that's transformational. I mean, that's what we have to offer.
Yeah, right. We have a very romantic industry, Jennifer. We need to remind everyone that.
Yeah, we do.
But we don't share it enough,
That's right.
And when competing against tech, right, from a salary perspective and a Hollywood perspective, it's one of the ways in which we fall behind. But I think there is so much to offer, and I think part of it is just about us communicating in a different way. I mean, if we look at the impact that we really have on lives every day and going forward, it's huge. And, in the pandemic, what was everybody talking about, right? Vaccines and biotech and changes to buildings, perhaps, right, to help address some of the challenges on keeping the disease from spreading in those spaces. But if we think about the biggest impacts over time relative to world health, it has been water, wastewater, sanitation, solid waste. Those things have made more of an impact than all of those other pieces put together. We don't talk about that.
So it's a marketing, branding, and imaging campaign that an issue that we have, that we don't get the message out there effectively to our younger students and college age students, and make the industry of designing, building, planning a more for lack of a better word, sexy career. So I think that's part of our challenge.
Yeah, the environment's ripe for that. And Tim, this group, we'll just take over your panel. The environment is ripe for that, though, I think, because Mark, I think the ground's moving underneath us so rapidly right now. And when you think about, two spectrums of how do we get that message out there, I think that the environment is teeing that up for us to do that at this time. And I'll give you 2 examples. Bloomberg has some data that from 2020 to 2021, this will not be a shock for anyone, Fortune 500 CEOs mentions of supply chain in their quarterly results went up 430% year on year, right? We didn't even talk about the supply chain just a few short years ago. So you have the bigger issues around us that are teeing up this discussion, the importance of our industry. And at the same time, as we're trying to recruit young people out of college to come and join us, and AECOM is, by the way, so please come to my LinkedIn and apply for your job. But you know, at AECOM, we have 2,000 digital professionals as part of our team around the world, right? And so when we're recruiting young people to come and join our team and build their careers with us, we're not talking about flying cars in the future. We're talking about flying cars right now. We're working in the UK, we're working in places like Florida and others with great partners like Ferrovial, building vertiports, emissions-free flying cars in the air. We're not talking about a Jetsons future here. This is what our team is working on today. This is what we're deploying today. So I do think that what's happening with the industry, we have an opportunity right now. We're center stage to be able to do a better job than we've done in past decades of telling that romantic part of our industry, as Dwayne so articulately put it.
Yeah, I just want to go back to something else you said, Dwayne, too, you know, relative to the industry not staying stuck in the mud. And I do believe over the last 4 to 5 years, we have seen a real embracing of technology and innovation in ways that we've never seen before. And I really do believe, and in large part too, to the type of people we're attracting, and I know we'll talk about that. But I really do feel like that we're at a point now where the momentum is really starting to roll. And as an industry, we are no longer satisfied with what's come before. And I do think there's a lot of positive energy there and acceptance of the need for that change that really is going to make the difference. You know, somebody on the chat just noted that civil engineering has become a thankless profession. And I don't agree with that. I do agree that sometimes when I describe what we do, sometimes I think my kids still don't know what we do as an industry, right? But the way I describe it is everything that you take for granted. Right? The ability to get on a roadway and travel safely, the ability to have clean water to your house, the ability to flip the switch and get lights, and it goes on and on and on. We take, as a society, we take all of those for granted, and we would not be able to do anything, right? Our industry is what greases the skids for all of commerce, and we take it for granted. And I just think we need to change that discussion a bit.
And great, you talk about who has heated up this conversation is the comment about civil engineering being a thankless profession. I think in the context of the future and talking about technology, you know, we look at strategies like parametric design, computational design, technology solutions that enable us to accelerate design, enhance quality. And the way we look at it at AECOM is actually giving our civil engineers, our brilliant civil engineers, the tools to be able to enable them to really, you know, for us to maximize the brilliance of our civil engineers by giving them these partner tools that will scale and help streamline the kind of work so they can focus on those parts of our scope where we need those brilliance. But I will say, so it's not a thankless job. It's you know, technology is helping us unleash and partner and actually expand the brilliance of our civil engineers. However, that said, and I know Tim will talk about it, you know, we are increasingly concerned when we see colleges, universities, where we're seeing less and less young people go into those civil infrastructure fields. And so as an industry, we need a major push, Mark, to go back to your comments and Dwayne's about making sure we get this message out here, but making sure to the comment from one of our listeners here that we don't, in selling the glamorous nature of our job and the skills required for now and the future, as we look at this digital transformation, that we don't forget to also mention digital is about bringing that foundation of civil, the physical world with the digital world, and we need to enhance both and continue to grow both.
Yeah.
Let me move the discussion into a slightly different direction. We talked about the technical side, the digital side, the value. You know, our industry, the construction industry, represents 13% of global GDP. So we're one of the largest ecosystems in the world. So we do have an impact, whether people want to admit it or not, right?
Yeah.
But Jen, you've been involved with leading some of the world's largest, you know, transportation projects and infrastructure projects in the world. You talked about Grand Central Terminal before, the new Grand Central Terminal and East Side Access. Over the past several years, Many companies in our industry have adopted wide-ranging ESG policies and commitments, dealing with social justice, dealing with sustainability, decarbonization, employee welfare, community betterment. AECOM has clearly been recognized as one of the leading industry players in helping advance such policies. How have such commitments by AECOM changed how your company is now operating, and what do you look for, and how do you define success in a project now differently now than you might have 3 to 5 years ago?
Yeah, Tim, this is not a small change. This is a transformational change. And while we've had the technical ability to be able to help guide clients through their missions, sustainability missions for a very long time, what we've seen in recent years really is transformational. When we're looking about what a successful project is in 2022, it's about economic outcomes, it's about equity outcomes, it's about environmental outcomes. It's no longer just a discussion of on time and on budget, which is where our industry was just a few years ago. And like, I think from AECOM's perspective, first, we're, to be frank, honored and humbled because of our scale, 50,000 professionals around the world across multiple continents. We do have an impact. We do have a reason to make we do have an opportunity to make a meaningful impact. That's why I joined AECOM, because we touch so many projects in different parts of the world. Our ability to change our internal practices, we do have a unique role in the industry to be able to change how infrastructure is delivered. And we're very humbled and proud to be able to take that role. What we've done as a company is first, like all companies, looked inward first. And so we've got our science-based net zero emissions goals by 2040. And we've had some recent validation from the science-based initiative in recent months. So that includes things like reducing our corporate travel by 50%. Do you think you'd hear that from a consulting firm, right? So we're taking some real action and looking at how we can address things internally to meet our goals. But our real impact, as I said before, is really in working with our clients and partners around the world in the projects. That's where we can really move the needle. And now every major design project that we touch, we look at through a lens of how do we reduce carbon by at least 50% from industry norms on those projects. That's where we can have the huge impact. And when we look at our key client account managers, measured not just on the time and quality and safety of the jobs that we're working on, critical, but also looking at different measures for performance around social outcomes, environmental outcomes, and really, enabling this is really a lot of our digital tools. That's really the bridge on how we can sit down internally with our engineers, but externally with clients, and use digital tools to evaluate the carbon impact of scope decisions, material decisions, site decisions when we're looking at these projects. But that's where our impact is going to be moving forward, is through our major projects and that commitment to reduce carbon by 50% on every big project we touch.
I think if I could add to that, I think going back to the first point about recruiting people in our industry, solving the biggest problem we've got facing us, which is reducing carbon emissions and sustainability and economic equity, that even more makes our industry, I think, even more attractive to the up and coming high schools and college graduates, because that's the engineering background is what's going to help us through this climate challenge that we've got. So I think it's even another point to consider.
And the projects we're working on, Tim, in this space, to your point, Mark, they're career defining types of projects, whether you're working with the Netherlands with great partners to roll out thousands of EV charging stations, whether you're equipping roadways in Michigan to accelerate implementation of autonomous vehicles. We've got 20 different agencies just in the US now that we're working on transitioning their buses to electric fleets. So this is stuff that's happening now that's also career defining projects for people in our industry.
Jen, you talk about decarbonization strategies. One of the research projects that the global leaders in construction management did in the last 6 months in conjunction with Turner & Townsend was to develop a net zero scorecard, looking at how can we measure what a carbon content of a project is, and what are ways that you can take that out. Because when you look at the construction industry, construction represents about 39% of global carbon emissions. and about a quarter of that comes from the construction process itself. So your point about decarbonization strategies in each of your projects of reducing that by 50% is something we've never talked about before, but now all of a sudden, with the Paris Agreement and after Glasgow, COP26 last year, this is front and center of every discussion going on. So that's a very key point.
Yeah, one other point there too, because I think it's important. I think it's important how technology plays into it. But at WGI, we think about it through three different lenses: the sustainability, the resilience, and adaptation. And I think that adaptation part is becoming more and more important with the changing conditions that our infrastructure has to react to at all times. But like never before, the systems we have in place, we start to think about digital twins, the ability to really understand what's happening in these complex systems, and having the ability for us to create in a way that's adaptable in the future. And the expectations, I think, that we need to place upon ourselves, and I think many of the agencies that we work for, it's changing how we view what used to be a static piece of infrastructure into something that's dynamic and has the ability to really change and adapt over time.
So Greg, stay on that point for a second, because over the years, through your work at Columbia, your work as one of the founders of Smart City Works Venture Studio, and now as the president of WGI, you've been a big proponent of entrepreneurism, innovation, digitalization, and something you touched on before, the essential need to get the culture of a company right in order to enable people to perform at their highest levels. Our industry now has 5 generations working in it. How are the expectations and perspectives of our younger colleagues helping to change our industry and forcing that change to come about in ways that we never expected before?
Yeah, and I think, Tim, it's a great question too. I think it is moving to a place of forcing, and I mean it in a good way, right? It's a really good impetus. But I'll start by telling a story which I think highlights where we are. A couple of weeks ago, I spent some time with a recent addition to the company. I was at one of our offices in Texas. And a young woman with 2 undergraduate engineering degrees and a master's from a top flight engineering school, fantastic addition to the firm. So she had been in another firm at a competitor and kept offering her ideas and talking about things she was frustrated with and the red tape. And she was told that they appreciate her ideas, but they wanted her to stay focused on the plans and the calcs and just get your work done, please. And to the credit of one of our leaders, after a conversation with her at an industry event, asked her that if she was given the opportunity at WGI to focus on those kinds of things, would she make the move? And she now holds an innovation role in one of our divisions. And an interesting part of this process, we were looking for folks, obviously, with technology backgrounds, programming experience in languages like Python. And she has no educational or work experience in the computer sciences. However, when we asked her about her programming skills, she just laughed, noting that when she did her master's, when she handed in any homework, she couldn't hand it in unless it was done and programmed, right? Her homework had to be programmed. That's the way they're learning. Their world is so different. And I think it's the opportunity that we have with Gen Z, right? As an industry, we all know that we're behind as an industry. We're lagging. We're not where we should be. But they stand ready to help move us in the right direction. In fact, demand it. They're eager. They're extremely well-trained. We see the folks that come through schools like Columbia and the GLCM program, right? It's super well-trained, super motivated. We see the opportunities we have with the startups out there today who are just begging to get an entrance and a seat at our tables to explain their ideas and the great work that they have done with their companies. But there's a huge wall up around us. There's a moat and a high wall. It also highlights the challenges we have as an industry, which is still largely run by, traditionalist baby boomers and Gen Xers.
Right.
And what describes us, and I'll be dating myself, but I straddle the baby boomer and Gen Xers. But when we describe us, it's loyalty, it's company first, it's career, it's very formal, job-centered life. And if we contrast that with what describes Gen Zers, it's professional development over loyalty, right? We see that all the time. They don't hesitate. In 2 years, sometimes even less, if they're not getting the type of development they want, they're on to the next opportunity. Meaningful work, right? Going back, I think, to the ESG conversation, but they want meaningful work. They also want flexibility over formality, right? And that's something we struggle with because as a business, we haven't been very good at that. And these are all things that, you know, that we need to wrestle with. Efficiency over process, right? It makes them crazy, and it should, that they know there's better ways to do things. And if we don't give them that opportunity to change, they're not going to stand around for it, right? So they're at the forefront, I think, of bringing us the technology. There's no tolerance for inefficiency. They're going to demand to be heard. They're forcing us to reckon with the issues of workplace flexibility. And I think it reinforces the issue around ESGs. And, you know, one of the things we focused a lot on at WGI is addressing those from the inside. Our first core value is passion for people, and our second core value is about be the change you seek. And we give folks the opportunity to do those things that they're passionate about, right? To share their ideas, to make the changes that they need to be efficient and effective in their work, to give them opportunities for development. We not only want to hear the ideas, but then we give them the opportunities to go put them to work. We support them. In fact, we created a ventures arm to spin up those ideas and invest in them and the changes that they recommend. So, you know, they are, I think, forcing us to think about how we operate as a business, and it's making us better because of it.
Well, you know, it's interesting, Greg, those points are great because, you know, before we started this forum, the five of us were talking about how this war on talent is affecting every company. It seems like companies like WGI, AECOM, Google, TNT, everyone in the industry is doing things much differently than we did 2 or 3 years ago to not just attract new talent, but to keep and retain that talent too. Is that right?
Yep, exactly right. And making us better for it. Yeah, absolutely.
And Greg, you know, there's so much in what you said that I connect with. But with talent and with just facing facts, good people can choose where they want to work. There's an element for every company to realize you got to keep up or you're going to get dragged, right? And being able to provide the flexibility and giving people enough people to express themselves innovatively and creatively is kind of what people are looking for at the moment, I think. Jennifer's team is helping us design a bridge on one of our projects in Silicon Valley. And the setup we gave each other kind of looking at this bridge is, this thing is 100 years old and we're going to be replacing it, right? That's the assignment. However, in 100 years, people are going to look at this bridge and try and get an understanding of who we were as a generation and why we did the things we did. You know, it kind of heightens the responsibility of what we have to do. And I think once you start to integrate with the next generation coming in, and look, you know, there are a lot of complaints around, you know, the differing value systems, but look, maybe they're right. Let's entertain that. You know, time is a weapon of mass destruction. It gets all of us eventually, right? We have no other choice but to hand the baton and allow them to be responsible with this industry that, you know, we're moving forward with. So I really think that you're thinking about it the right way, Greg. I think I think that we need to kind of capture that at large. I think it's really cool.
That's a great point. As I think as someone referred to, maybe it was you, Jen, talked about the legacy benefit of a project. And Dwayne, just like you're talking about the legacy benefit of building a bridge in a way differently for the future. You know, it's interesting. I was thinking before when you were talking about the different way of looking at success, I think each of the 4 companies involved here, including myself, have been involved in one way, shape, or form with one of the largest infrastructure projects in the world that is going to open next week, the Crossrail project in London.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the Crossrail project in London, And if you look at the legacy benefit that brought to the industry in terms of jobs creation, skills creation, community benefits, economic development, all those elements you were talking about, Jen, I think even though it was over budget, it was a little over schedule, those legacy benefits that Crossrail is delivering are a significant aspect of what you were talking about before.
Yeah, including, equity and efficiency and low carbon emissions, all those aspects.
All those key. So Mark, over the last several years, you've been advising private sector and public sector clients that are involved in some of the US's most complex infrastructure and development projects through your role when you were a partner at Deloitte and now as the head of infrastructure for T&T. As our industry continues to emerge from the last 2.5 years of extended work from home, remote working schedules due to the COVID-19 pandemic, what changes do you see in Turner and Townsend in regard to people's expectations going forward? And how do these changes affect as Greg said before, the corporate culture of your company?
Yeah, well, thanks for that question, Tim. I think we've all experienced explosive growth in hiring over the past 2 years, while we've been in this pandemic. And like at T&T and similar at Deloitte, I think we've doubled the size of our US practice and firm in terms of headcount. And most of those people have been working from home. So the corporate culture that we talk about, becomes it erodes if you're not, collaborating and working with people and getting that mentoring relationship. So, the hybrid model, I think for all of us is kind of here to stay. Everyone's got the employees today don't want to commute to Center City or spend 5 days in an office when they could be effective working from home. But I think they're beginning to appreciate the time spent collaborating with people and learning from some of the more experienced folks and learning on the job. And I think the value of being in an office location and getting that experience is becoming more important and being recognized. So I think which is also going to help to maintain and build the culture of all of our firms, right? So I think the hybrid model is what we're going to be living with for a long time. And I think that the value of being together has been recognized. So that's some of it. I think, there's another aspect to this. So, Jennifer talked about the East Side Access people, and same thing at T&T. We've had several people who have been on work sites 5 days a week since, the pandemic, and that they've had a different experience, right? They've had, the construction projects, aside from a short pause, have kept going. So their experience working with clients and their colleagues on project sites has been different, and that's going to continue, I think, going forward. There's always going to be the need for an on-site workforce, as well as the laborers that build these projects. So, we're in an interesting time, but I think that's some food for thought that I'm sure my colleagues here will build upon.
For sure, Mark. And I might just do a quick shout out too, as we talk about our on-site professionals and also the world roaring back here this time. I just think we're all of us do big infrastructure jobs. Just a quick shout out around safety, because we are watching that very carefully as teams come back. The need to be mindful, the need to focus on safety. So as an industry, we don't see an uptick in incidents during this time, because it's these big transition times when we tend to see that. So we're highly focused on that. On the bigger issue, Mark, I love how when you're talking about hybrid, it's really critical in our industry. You're not going to see, companies like at least AECOM with this harsh mandate of come back, right? We're going to have more flexibility to grow. We want to be able to create that hybrid environment, but it's really critical that it is hybrid, because our organization, our industry is so apprentice based. It's all about apprenticeship, no matter what part of our aspect. So trying to get that balance right. And we've made a lot of changes in how we operate. Luckily, we have the digital tools to be able to provide that hybrid environment. On the Gordie Howe Bridge, very complex bridge project, we were able to quickly move from 80 offices around the world to 800 kitchen tables in pretty rapid time. So it's good to be able to it's lucky we made that investment to be able to do that. But when we talk about how we actually shape our workforce moving forward, we've had a very engaged process where we've gone out to our teams and said, help inform us what this new workplace of the future is going to look like. And for us, it's not just about technology tools and how do we be more efficient and continue to be productive at remote locations, but it's also arranging our real estate strategy so that we can create those environments where people can come and collaborate and benefit from that apprenticeship model that's so important to our business. And so it's looking at places like big cities like Dallas, where we have moved, have that city center presence, but are also building satellite offices. So now as we come back to a hybrid environment, parents can be there, they can work at a satellite office, they can have that engagement, but at 4 o'clock, they can run out and do the quick baseball game with their kids and come back and then have that environment as well. As they've learned to the benefit of flexibility during COVID and being there with their families, how do we create an environment, digital tools to be able to be flexible, but also a real estate strategy so that we make it convenient and realistic for people to want to come and engage and be a part of that apprenticeship, especially for our young people. Greg, you were so eloquent in talking about the power that they have to transform our industry, but they've come into our workforce during COVID. They're not as sticky, right? Because they've come into that remote, haven't had that in person. So trying to get that balance right is, the top priority for us at the moment.
Totally agree.
That's interesting, Jen. One of the things you said there really was it always has been hybrid. Whenever I've worked at an engineering firm, all of the people who have offices were never in their offices, right? They were at airports. So
we're on site. Yeah.
That's right, or on site. So it's kind of interesting to kind of frame it that way rather than sort of rather than defining it and kind of putting sort of a structure around it. How can you just sort of call it, and make it a little bit more casual? Because one of the things that we often contemplate too is that for everybody who wants to work from home full time, the same people don't want to do Thanksgiving dinner over Zoom, right? No matter how compelling your argument is that you're more productive at work, you're not going to go to your kids' birthday parties over Zoom, right? So there is some recoil to that to say, look, there is value to being together. But I personally think that you let people do whatever they want. The people who are ambitious and who are keen to advance their careers will end up in the same space with each other. And another point on this too is, when I worked for Disney and now that I'm working for Google, when you ask somebody, so tell me what your job's like. Oh, it's great. You show up, there's free food and, they have bikes around. They very rarely talk about their work. They talk about their environment. So now if everybody's working in their pajamas in their living room, so tell me a bit about your work. I have to survey people to see what they say now. Do they talk about the flexibility? Do they talk about the freedom? Maybe we've moved on from, people contextualizing their work around their environment.
It's interesting. I also think a key part of that with where we are today too has to be about a level of honesty in what it means if your choice is to be remote, right? Because we all know we can make it work, certainly for a period of time. And certainly for seasoned professionals, it's a very different experience than, say, young graduate engineers. And they don't know any different. They really don't know any better in a lot of cases. And, we have to be honest about what the long-term implications of them working from home are. We certainly, WGI, we believe very much in the value of being together. We believe that we are better together. We believe that we do better work, but that there needs to be a level of flexibility in the workplace, right? And again, I think when we talk about Gen Z, that's what they're looking for is more flexibility. But as part of that, and Dwayne, I loved what you said too about, those people that are really engaged in the work are going to find themselves coming together, because those that want to work in their living room in their pajamas every day our experience is that they're not necessarily going to have the same opportunities, certainly not the same mentoring. And we all know that level of synergy and innovation that happens when we bring people together, right? That excitement and the ideas that just pop up that were not planned. You just don't get that same dynamic when you're remote. And one other thing too, Jennifer, I like that you brought up a safety, and another one there is quality. And there's a part of this that we need to, I believe, as an industry, stay very focused on. And while the tools may be there for us to have the quality built into the process, being remote makes it much more complex. And we have to be very, very careful, given the significance of our projects, that we don't allow that remoteness to cause issues around quality. So I think it's something the industry really hasn't dealt with, because if you look at the duration of our projects, they won't manifest themselves for years potentially. But I think it's a real issue for us to stay on top of.
Let me pivot to one related issue. I want to go back to something you dealt with, the people, Greg. Jennifer, you mentioned before, I love your stat about CEOs mentioning supply chain 450% higher than ever before. I love numbers like that for great cocktail party talk, right? But I think it's very indicative. What are your organizations doing about, we talked about social justice, social equality before as part of legacy benefit. What are you all doing regarding inclusive supply chains? What are you doing in that regard?
So one of the programs that we're working on, we're very pleased to work with USDOT and colleagues like Phil Washington on an effort that is a really pragmatic conversation around getting minority firms to lift them up to prime status on major projects. And this is a tall task, right? Because you have all kinds of technical issues like identification and those kinds of things that you need to work through. And so AECOM is part of a group leading that effort to find out, what do we need to do to procurement practices, for example, to be able to certification processes, to be able to welcome these partners in a more meaningful way and set all of us up for success in big, complicated projects where we're working together. And this goes when we talk about, I think that the nature of this sort of diverse conversation around the table, where we're bringing, some of our great transit and aviation and port clients to the table, and also private practitioners, to say, inadvertently, what we're seeing in the landscape right now is you have clients that have these aspirational goals and to build generational wealth, which we are fully behind. But when you look in their procurement documents and you get into the muck and the details of the industry in which we operate, in one part of the procurement document, you have this aspirational goal. And in the other part of the procurement document, as the machine has sort of run on muscle memory, you have technical requirements that actually undermine this. So if I try to meet this requirement, I'm probably not going to get the gig, because I'm not be able to meet requirements over here. And so we're trying to level set that and have some meaningful conversations with some of our most ambitious, particularly transit clients who are looking to lift these firms. How do we work together as an industry to work through some of these issues to make sure we create an environment where not only minority firms can join us and take a more meaningful role in these projects, but that we can together set these projects up for success long term and build that generational wealth while we're doing it. So that's an area, a big focus for AECOM at the moment, Tim.
Yeah,
That's
Tim, as you may know, at Turner and Townsend, we recently hired a supplier diversity chief that came from one of the city agencies that focused on that aspect. So like Jennifer's firm, we're trying to be proactive about mentoring smaller firms and more diverse firms to become part of our teams and helping them grow. So to meet those aspirational goals that the clients have. And so just one thing that's out there that we've been doing.
That's great.
Oh, go ahead, Dwayne, sorry.
Yeah, Tim, what's interesting to contemplate is just from a numbers point of view. Well, let's just argue that we've got $1 trillion to spend in the next 10 years in infrastructure. Let's just argue that 10% of that has got to be assigned to some version of supplier diversity, right? What does that end up looking like as an industry of, let's say, SBEs at this stage? And how is that received in the context of their revenue thresholds? I mean, I've worked with SBEs that don't want to exceed their revenue threshold because it gives them less access to projects.
Right.
So we've gone through this exercise on some of our developments. What is the supply chain of diverse supply, if you like, and how does that meet the demand that's coming up? And then what are we doing to seed the next generation of companies that provide that service as well? So, you know, it's interesting to kind of look at it from a fundamentals point of view, because it may not work out.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. Greg, anything you want to add?
Yeah. Just one thing too. We talked about the external, and I think there's an internal piece here as well, because I believe we can't have a healthy culture within the company without an understanding of the issues at the company level, right? I mean, how does it impact us? How does it impact all of our associates? And we can't be out there solving these issues holistically if we don't have a grounding in the realities of them and how it impacts our associates day in and day out. And I think one of the, the healthiest things that we've seen at WGI over the course of the last couple of years is spending a lot of time having conversations and learning from those who maybe experience life differently than I do, than the leadership does day in and day out, understanding those issues at a much different level. And that changes our thinking on how we approach projects. And I think so aligning the culture in the firm as well internally so we can better represent our clients externally, I think is a big part of that.
And I'll go back to the digital component of this, Tim, too. Good point, Greg. And one exciting area for us, we've been working with a lot of clients on digital tools to help them look through projects with an equity lens in the communities in which they're, building and rebuilding. We're doing a great project with the city of Baltimore right now, where we have a tool where, as we're looking at site locations, we can give them the data in real time about how this project will not just contribute to mobility, but contribute to equity when it comes to the community as well. And so I think that's an area. We have another digital tool called Plan Engage, which helps as a cloud-based interactive tool that transitions that good old-fashioned EIS document that we've all on this call lived with for our careers, and makes it more interactive and creates opportunities for more genuine engagement and greater prioritization of equity in the development and assessment of transportation improvements. And so this is an area, again, where to Greg, we've got to have the diversity inside our organizations, but also has given us the tools to be able to sit down with our partners and make sure as we're developing projects, and that's the power that we have to change the world really is in the development of these major projects, that we have the data and the information and the tools we need to be able to plan projects that connect communities and not divide communities.
So that's great. Great comment, Jen. Thank you on that. Folks, I'm going to just kind of wrap it up here, but it's interesting when we planned out this session called Delivering Infrastructure in the New World Order. We originally thought this was going to evolve into how technology is shaping our industry differently, or how we deal with productivity improvement. But if you look at our discussion, words around supplier diversity, equity lens, as you just said, Jen, economic equality, social equality, the IKEA bias, Dwayne, you look at the decarbonization, sustainability, all of these terms that 2 or 3 years ago were not part of the vernacular for a conference or a forum like this, that now all of a sudden you can see how our companies are changing, how our industry is changing, and how the four of you and the four of your companies and organizations are helping to move our industry into a new world order to address these other sides of the business that were not just civil engineering before, or rebar or concrete pours. It was more other aspects. And now I see a whole new movement that is moving our industry hopefully to a better place, and helping the next generation take over for us and make it a better place as well. So I want to thank Jen Allman from AECOM. Thank you so much. Dwayne Gilmore from Google, Mark Blumpkin from Turner & Townsend, and Greg Sauter from WGI. Thank you so much, folks, for all the time you took to get ready for this, for sharing your insights. And we look forward to seeing all the great work that you continue to do in our industry. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Tim. Happy Infrastructure Week.
Take care.
Dwayne, get your cards out.
Thank you.
Well,
Bye.
see you later.
Thanks, everyone.